Good evening, everybody, and I realise that these sort of events, there's always people that prefer to sit at the back. My wife Gillian and I like that when we go to the picture theatre, but if you do want to come a bit further forward, you're very welcome to. Firstly, thank you to all of you for coming here this evening, representatives of the media, our key stakeholders and supporters of the Australian War Memorial. And I firstly, on behalf of the Chairman of the Council of the Australian War Memorial, Rear Admiral Ken Doolan, welcome all of you, but also apologise for Ken not being here. Apart from being the Chairman of our Council, he's President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, and as is consistent with his character, he's patron of a number of charities, one of which he committed to over a year ago to be in Sydney. So Admiral Doolan is not here this evening. It's firstly my pleasure and my privilege to introduce to us to say a few words here this evening our Minister. Minister Michael Ronaldson is Special Minister for State, Minister for Veterans Affairs, but also the Minister who is advising the Prime Minister on the centenary of the First World War. And I appreciate very much our Minister being here. I also think Senator Farrell, the Shadow Minister, is here, and if he is not, he's most certainly represented. So, Minister, I welcome you to make some remarks to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brendan. The first thing I'll say is that Jill vehemently denies that she sits up the back of the picture theatre when she's with you. Can I acknowledge, please, obviously Dr. Brendan Nelson, Chief of Air Force Air Marshal Jeff Brown, Chief of Navy Vice Admiral Ray Griggs, representing the ACT Minister Dr. Chris Burke, Leader of the Opposition, the ACT, Jeremy Hanson, Mr Shane Carmody, the Acting Secretary of the Department, members of Council, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and particularly a warm welcome to my colleagues, Senator Kate Lundy and Gabe Brotman. And if Don Farrell is here, and he should come down the front, and I'd very much like to acknowledge my counterpart in the Senate. I'm delighted to join you this evening for the Australian War Memorial's First World War Centenary Program and brand launch. The memorial is the nation's home of commemoration, reflection and remembrance. For more than 70 years, this place has been the focus of our nation's attention, both in times of peace and in times of war. It is iconic for the place it fills in our nation, in our hearts and in our minds. It is a place which honours all of those who've made this supreme sacrifice. Over the next 5 years, in particular, the nation's attention will quite rightly turn to the Australian War Memorial as we commemorate the centenary of the First World War. Later this year, the memorial will open the $35 million redevelopment of the First World War galleries, a project the government is absolutely committed to. The much-loved First World War galleries will be given new life as we move towards this, our most important period of commemoration. The gallery redevelopment is not about reinterpreting history. Current generations of school children cannot imagine life 100 years ago, beyond it being a time without Facebook and mobile phones. The notion of a world at war and young men from all parts of this great country signing up in their hundreds of thousands to defend king and country is a foreign one to those young men and women. That is why these galleries are so critically important. They tell a story. They tell a story through the diorama scenes which depict the battlefields of the Western Front, the preserved uniforms of the men who were at the charge of the light horse at Beersheba, the nurses' uniforms and the tins of bully beef, and the original hardtack biscuit taken from the trenches of Gallipoli. These are timeless relics of the past which tells our nation's story. They are tools through which a past generation speaks to future generations. And we are the custodians responsible for passing it on. If I can say in passing that every time I see Brendan and Ken, They're pains to tell me the redevelopment is not only running on time, but is running on budget. So congratulations and well done. We're all obviously pleased about that, and like others, looking forward very much to the finished product. And what we'll see tonight is just one part of the Australian Government's agenda for the centenary of Anzac. And whilst the memorial will be at the centre of most Australians' minds during the centenary period, it is not the only place where commemoration of this time in our nation's history will take place. And the Government has invested $18.75 million in the Anzac Centenary Local Grants Program, and that funding's been increased to $125,000 per electorate, building on a policy of the former government to support community-based commemoration in towns and cities across the nation. Now, if I can just briefly move away from my notes, I was a member for Ballarat in 1995 when the Australia Remembers program, which many of you may remember, was introduced and run by Con Schacker, a former Labor Veterans Affairs Minister. This was a magnificent program that engaged country communities right across the nation. And it's my very fervent hope that people like Gay and Kate and I don't get this money, but Gay does as a lower house member, and I'm sure that my colleagues in the lower house of all political persuasions will ensure this money is well spent and will be used to, again, commemorate the centenary. I would also like to acknowledge the work of Mr Lindsay Fox AC in progressing the corporate fundraising for the Anzac Centenary Public Fund. It is hoped that this fund will raise sufficient monies to support the Centenary of Anzac National Travelling Exhibition, a project currently being scoped by the Memorial, and I know that Brendan will be talking about this later on. This exhibition is planned to crisscross Australia between late 2015 and 2018, and to give all Australians, particularly those who live outside of Canberra and outside the metropolitan cities of this nation, the chance to share in the centenary and commemorate in their local communities. And we are committed to ensuring, both Brendan and I and the Chair, that the centenary of Anzac leaves a lasting legacy for all Australians. During this time, we'll honour the extraordinary deeds of ordinary men and women who did not go to battle to seek glory, but who by their deeds and actions achieved greatness. It'll be a legacy not just of bricks and mortar, but perhaps more importantly, a legacy of understanding. An understanding of where we fought, when we fought, and the values we fought for. An acknowledgement of our defeats and an awareness of our stirring victories and decisive achievements on the field of battle, on the seas and in the sky. And equally importantly, it's an opportunity to reflect on the horror of war. As a nation, we have a responsibility to ensure that the service and sacrifice of past generations is never forgotten. We'll remember those who made the supreme sacrifice in defence of our beliefs and our way of life. We'll remember those who came home wounded in body and spirit, and we will remember their families. The Centenary of Anzac is not just about the past, but also about the future. It's understanding that tens and thousands of Australian men and women continue to serve our nation today, upholding a tradition that started over a century ago. These men and women and their families devote their lives to the protection of ours, and we owe them, as we owe their forebears, our gratitude and respect for the work they do in our country's name. Tonight, our nation's commemorative home unveils its agenda for the centenary of the First World War. And Brendan, can I congratulate you and your team? I know that you will be a pivotal part of this extraordinary period in this country's history. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much for your very, very generous remarks, Minister, and your confidence in our team here at the Australian War Memorial, led by the Council and our leadership group. I can assure you your confidence and that of the Australian people is well placed. We won't let you down. I should have said earlier that, and of all people, I said to the Minister, you don't have to explain it to me, but the Minister has had some quite unexpected things come up which will require him to leave early. So for those in the media, if you see the Minister leave, that please don't report he left in disgust or complete disagreement with what was being said. It's just simply that he will need to go. What I'm going to do over the next 40 minutes or so is systematically unpack everything that we are doing and we are planning to do for the centenary of the First World War. It is, of course, the centenary of Anzac, but it's important that all of us remember it is the centenary of the First World War as well as the centenary of Anzac. And thanks to the leadership shown by Angus Houston and the Anzac Centenary Advisory Board and our government, it will also reflect on a century of service. When you were out in what's called the Western Courtyard Gallery, you couldn't have helped but noticed that the Sonderstein's original design for the Australian War Memorial is on the wall just as you come into this BAE Systems Theatre. And above it is the vision of Charles Bean, enunciated in 1948, which is, "Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made." Bean was, of course, Australia's First World War official historian. It was his vision and drive that ultimately gave birth to this memorial and museum. He wrote the official history, and in his final paragraph, to try and sum up the entire thing, he said, "What these men did, nothing can alter now. The good and the bad, the greatness and the smallness of their story, it rises as it will always rise, above the mists of time, as a monument to great-hearted men, and for their nation a possession forever." Consistent with that vision and Bean's summation of all of it, having landed with the troops at Gallipoli on the 25th of April 1915 and stayed with them at the front until the very end of the war, everything that we will do and everything I'm about to present to you will be entirely consistent with both the vision and the summation and historical documentation of what these men and women as nurses did for us, and as our Minister just reminded us, our nation and our values. One of the common frustrations I have, and I know the Minister and the Shadow Minister probably have the same thing, I'm constantly correcting people. I have people of goodwill and good heart who are saying to me, "Brendan, these Anzac celebrations, I can't wait for it," or "I've got an idea for the celebrations." This is not a celebration, it will be a commemoration. We commemorate the sacrifices from a population of 4.5 million people. 1 million men could volunteer. They were of an age that would enable them to do so. 430,000 did. 330,000 were sent overseas. 62,000 were dead. Another 60,000 died within a decade of returning from the 155,000 wounded or imprisoned. We will be commemorating a sacrifice, but what we will celebrate is a legacy that has been born of these cataclysmic events that shaped and defined largely the way we see ourselves as Australians and relate to one another in the world today almost a century later. We celebrate a legacy which is one ultimately of self-sacrifice in the name of other human beings, of one another, and values that have defined and shaped, and increasingly for a young generation of Australians, who we are and who we want to be. As the Minister observed, it is about our history, but even more important, it's about our future. And this false debate that we've seen in the last week initiated by a book written by a very respected army officer, to suggest that commemoration of these events in some way diminishes the importance that is ascribed to and support given to the veterans of our contemporary conflicts. It is not one or the other. This is a commemoration of who we are. And and so. The other thing that is important, and some of the directors of the cultural institutions in Canberra and national institutions are here, and they've heard me say this before. If over the next 4 years, the only thing Australians do is come to the Australian War Memorial, in one sense we will have failed. By definition, almost all of what we tell here and what we will present is the series of military battles, from enlistment through the chronological order of those battles, and to give Australians and our international visitors an understanding, not just a knowledge, but an understanding of those battles and the consequences of them for the men who participated in them. What's very important, which we certainly will be doing here at the Memorial, is we will promote to Australians the need for them to visit the National Library, the National Archives, the National Sound and Film Archive, the Museum for Democracy, the National Gallery, that within its charter, each one of these institutions has an important part of the story. Who were we in 1913 and 1914? What was our culture? How did we change through the course of the war? How was the war reported and who was reporting it? What sort of music we were listening to? What sort of work were people doing? What was the nature of the very deep political debates that occurred within Australia? Paradoxically, we were arguably never more divided as a nation than we were through the period of the First World War, and then subsequently emerged from it with the passing of generations, feeling that it gave a sense of confidence to who we are in the world. We will be actively promoting visitation to all of the cultural institutions who will present an aspect of this story within their own mission. We will do so physically, we will also do so online. Right, the Minister mentioned the National Travelling Exhibition for the centenary of the First World War. An initial tranche of $10 million was provided to the Australian War Memorial on the 1st of July last year, and we are well advanced in developing this. Whether it is seen to its completion will depend on the generosity of Australians, particularly the corporate sector, philanthropists, and the success of the indefatigable efforts of Mr Lindsay Fox in raising the money necessary for it. As the Minister has announced previously, we have now signed a contract with Imagination, and I congratulate them for doing so. The Chief of Navy, I know, was extraordinarily impressed with the work that they did for the Naval Review late last year. And we are now well advanced in developing the concepts which will obviously tell the story of the origins of the war and the passage through the war until its completion, the series of battles, and as the Minister said, the cost, the social dimensions of that. I can tell you at this stage we are planning to travel the Mark IV tank, the A7V Mephisto from the Queensland Museum, and we will also travel the 9.2 howitzer, and we are hoping to also travel an 18-pounder. It's important that there be some of these large items that travel, and there will also be, as you would understand, immersive experiences associated with the touring exhibition. But as I emphasise, it will be subject to the success of Mr Fox's extraordinary efforts in this regard. The First World War galleries. I thought I'd give you a bit of an insight into what we're doing here. The first is that when people, the galleries are closed at the moment, and when people come into the galleries, prior to entry into the gallery itself, which you can see envisaged here, we will have a capacity for visitors to download electronically onto tablets that we are planning to provide here extra information that people may or want through the course of going through the galleries. I've also said to our team that we will have an electronic board next to that which will display the newspaper of the day 100 years ago. What were Australians reading? So if you come to the Australian War Memorial, for example, on the 3rd of July 2017, you will read what Australians were being told 100 years ago. As you can see from this, the Ascot landing boat will be presented in a way which enables you to easily look into it, to give the effect of it basically being in water. The First World War, Australia in the Great War, and you can just see glimpses there of the enlistment. What you can't see in much detail there is the story of why Australia entered the war. A summary of why the war occurred. Why did Australia enter the war so readily? Clearly seeing ourselves at that time as members of the British Empire. And then as you go through the galleries, through to the end of the war, there will be some description of the social dislocation and the debates within Australia during the period of the war, but necessarily for the Australian War Memorial, the majority of this will be the series of military events. There will be 1,600 items which will be displayed in the First World War galleries. Many of them either have not been seen before or not have been seen for quite some period of time. The much-loved dioramas will be in chronological order and have been undertaken. A significant program of restoration has been undertaken for them. I've said to the staff that I think we need to be soft touch on the technology. I mentioned earlier on that we will have, before you get into the galleries, a capacity for people to use technology to deepen and broaden their experience through the galleries. But I've learned enough about museums and have experienced enough to see people wandering around looking at technology and missing everything that's actually being presented to them. The technology is a means to an end, it is not an end in itself. So there will be new technologies, digital signs, you can change the languages and the size of font and various things, but we will go relatively soft touch in the course of the galleries themselves. A number of our iconic artworks will obviously be displayed, and there will be the series of events, the declaration of the war, enlistment, Rabaul, the story of the Navy will be told where it is appropriate in different elements of the war. There will also then, of course, be the embarkation, Egypt, Gallipoli and the campaign, France, Belgium, Palestine, Egypt, the leadership of John Monash in 1918 and the Australian role that was played in breaking the Hindenburg Line, and then a sense of the aftermath of the war. We will be making sure that people have a very clear understanding of the cost of this war. It's one thing to say 62,000 dead, but every person that goes through this will get an understanding of that at the individual level, to look beyond those broad brushstrokes. And so ultimately, when people leave the galleries, they will have a deep sense of pride in what had been achieved, but not a shallow jingoistic pride, but one instead informed by a sober understanding of the cost that was paid. Cost paid by individuals, by families, by communities, and a nation. This, for example, is another part of the gallery. We've got Australian timber is going to be used for parquetry, and through, as you follow sequentially through the galleries, there will be a duckboard effect produced by two Australian timbers, one of which is Blackwood and the other one is a New South Wales, Catherine will tell me, a New South Wales spotted timber. These components, this is how we're intending to present them. For example, this is from a Mark IV tank. This has been donated to us by Jean and Mary L'Etoile Museum from Bulcourt. I had the privilege to go there late last year to personally examine these items, and we've got these, and we were presenting them. And what you don't see, but there are individual stories around the men who were associated with these battles, in this case in Bulcourt, and the way in which the tanks were actually used. You'll notice that we've got some artworks that are here as well. I mentioned the dioramas are being fully restored. This is Nicholas Flood, one of our professional curators. Our curators laid on their stomachs for about 3 months doing this sort of stuff. It's extraordinary to see this. And you'll see here, this is a restoration of Desert Patrol. We have 13 dioramas in our collection. 10 of the dioramas will be a part of the exhibition. We're bringing back CMAC, and which of course depicts the 11th Light Horse, principally from the 25th of September 1918 in Palestine. CMAC, of course, includes the largest number of Indigenous soldiers in one formed unit, and also Desert Patrol, which haven't been displayed here at the memorial since the early 1980s. We're also bringing in Monson Quetton with a new backdrop which is being painted for it. And again, as I said earlier, they will be in sequential order. The dioramas themselves, as I said, have undergone a very extensive restoration. And you'll see that we're going to present them in a sort of a letterbox kind of effect, and then a canvas, what is a canvas sort of surround, which is consistent with the webbing that was used by soldiers of the AIF. And a very sophisticated modern lighting technology is going to be applied to them, which will bring life to them. Not some sort of multimedia thing which distorts the dioramas at all, but rather brings to life the dioramas as they were originally designed and built. And in my very strong view, will enhance the experience that visitors have when they come and see them. I'd also like to announce that BHP Billiton has agreed to be our major partner for this exhibition. Governments of both persuasions have been and continue to be very generous to this institution. We also have a number of corporations and individuals who are extremely generous. We can provide something which is excellent, if not outstanding, with the resources that are available to us. But the difference between that and absolutely stunning is the support that we receive from individual companies. We're in BAE Systems Theatre, for example, and in this case, BHP Billiton has agreed to support us with $1 million. That will give us an opportunity to do quite a number of things in the what we call the tertiary works for the exhibition. And I thank BHP Billiton and its leadership very much for doing this. Yeah, thank you. We expect, by the way, to have the First World War galleries opened before the end of this year. We're hoping late November. I've said to the staff it's not the end of the world if it's a little bit later than that, but as the Minister said, at this stage we are definitely on track. The schedule is very tight for what we call the secondary works, all the cabinetry and all of the things into which the exhibits themselves will go, but we're determined that we'll have this opened before the end of this year, and you can expect there will be a major official opening early next year, and obviously certainly before Anzac Day. At the moment we have a temporary exhibition called Anzac Voices, and it's interesting, our Afghanistan exhibition is called The Australian Story. It's remarkable the similarities in the stories, a different age, a different war, a different time, between the stories that have been told so magnificently through our own staff and Chris Masters in Afghanistan. But we have Anzac Voices here at the moment, which will remain open until the First World War galleries are reopened. 56 men and women are featured in this exhibition. We have over 220 items. So it includes, for example, the diaries and letters and personal correspondence. Simpson's letters to his mother, for example. You can see Blackburn here, one of the Indigenous soldiers. We've identified 1,300 so far from the First World War, coming as they did from a very unequal society into Australia's first equal opportunity employer, the Australian Army. And then all sorts of relics which include Croft's pocketbook, which stopped a bullet on the day of the Gallipoli landing, and then the horror of the Western Front, Man in the Mud. So Anzac Voices will remain there until, as I say, till November this year. Anzac Connections is a very significant project, and Robin van Dijk, one of our leaders in this regard, has been working very hard on this. This is a major digitisation project. What we are well advanced in doing now is digitising these records, the letters, the diaries, the images, so that people can much more easily research the story that they are looking for, the image they're looking for, that then also that they can tag, provide comments, obviously download. And the first 100 stories which we have collated to make it easier for people were released with Anzac Connections in December last year. And we have much more of that to go, and that will unfold increasingly throughout this year. We've moved very much into a digital age, and I've said to our staff, there is no point us having any of these things if people can't see them and get access to them. Digitisation is very much the way of the future, not just for our institution, but for the kindred cultural institutions. Anzac Day 2015. Now, before I explain Anzac Day 2015, I'll just tell you what we are doing for Anzac Day this year. Last year, for the first time, we projected images onto the front of the memorial from midnight until 5:15 a.m. We will again be presenting images from our archive across more than a century. We will project those images from 9 p.m. on the evening of the 24th of April. And in addition to that, the key battlefields of land, sea and air over more than a century. This year, again, we will have readings to the crowd as they arrive and for those who have already arrived, commencing at 4:30 in the morning. Lieutenant Commander Desmond Woods will read excerpts from letters and diaries from the Gallipoli landing through to and including Somalia from 4:30 in the morning until 5 a.m. At 5 a.m, then Wing Commander Sharon Bown will read very moving, I just read them this morning, reflections on Afghanistan and the impact of the Afghanistan campaign on the 26,000 men and women who've been deployed through that theatre. From 5 a.m. until 5:15 a.m. she will do that, and as she's doing that, the images of the 40 men who've given their lives for our nation in Afghanistan will be projected onto the front of the memorial with the agreement of their families. Shortly after that, in the darkness and the quiet, a uniformed Indigenous serving member of the Australian Defence Force will play the didgeridoo for about 3 minutes, and then there will be silence and darkness for the remaining 12 minutes until the dawn service starts as usual at 5:30 in the morning. The speaker at the dawn service this year will be Ben Roberts-Smith, VC, MG. I can also inform you that the Prime Minister will be attending the War Memorial for Anzac Day this year and will be delivering the commemorative address at the National Service. We also have a lone pine tree in the gardens at the front of the memorial, grown as it was from a pine cone retrieved after the Battle of Lone Pine by one of our surviving soldiers. Having found his brother dead in the Turkish trenches, he sent the pine cone back to their mother. She grew from it a small sapling. That is the lone pine which is at the front of the Australian War Memorial. It is, unfortunately, as lone pines do, it has a limited life, and we will have a ceremonial planting of a new lone pine tree on Anzac Day this year. For Anzac Day 2015, it will be as I have just described in terms of projections, but those projections will be every night in the week leading up to Anzac Day. Projections of images predominantly, but not only, from the First World War, and in the week leading up to, and then of course, as I have described, in the evening leading to Anzac Day itself. We will also have those readings again from 4:30 in the morning, and then the national service later in the morning as usual. As I did last year, we will have very large screens, but more of them, at the back of the crowd so that people can actually see what is going on at the dawn service. Last year we had 35,000 people attend the dawn service. The year before it was 25,000. I will be very surprised if it is not considerably more than that this year, and certainly next year. Next year for 2015 we will also, and that of course is an image of our dawn service from last year, next year we will also have a large screen, and we will broadcast live the dawn service from Gallipoli. So people, Australians who wish to see it in the presence of a large number of fellow Australians will be able to do so here at the Australian War Memorial. Ben Roberts-Smith, of course, from last year, doing the readings at 5 a.m, and that, of course, is an image of our national service. Every day here now, we conduct a last post ceremony, which would be familiar to most of you now, and a part of that service, that last post ceremony, is to tell the story of one of those Australians from the Roll of Honour. One of those 102,700 Australians, who was this person, where were they born, what did they do, where did they grow up, who did they love, who loved them, and then how did they die for us. On Anzac Day next year, 2015, we will do that, and we will have an image of an Australian who was killed at the Gallipoli landing. We will also have an image and tell the story of a Turk from our former foes as a matter of respect that we have for the nation of Turkey and its people. And that story will be read in Turkish. The next thing, I mentioned that there are 62,000 on the Roll of Honour. On the evening of the 4th of August this year, we will turn a switch, and what will happen is the name of every one of those 62,000 will be projected onto the horizontal beam just below the dome on the Australian War Memorial. Each name will be projected for 30 seconds, and it will be projected on 19 occasions over 4 years. Every single night for 4 years, we will project the name of each one of them. I'm advised that the computer will be able to advise families who have an interest in this, obviously, when they might expect the name of a relative will be projected. Again, it is consistent with what we are endeavouring to do as a memorial and as a nation, to look beyond the broad brushstrokes, to remember individual sacrifices that have been made in our name. It will be visible down Anzac Parade, and I expect that there will be families who will plan a trip to Canberra to the Australian War Memorial to see the name of a great-grandfather, or a great-uncle, or someone that was important to them projected in this way.
Arthur Beaumont Wood, age 25.
Victor Harold Mead, age 25.
Alexander Joseph Thompson, age 27. James Ellaby Abbott, age 18. Joseph Kavanagh, age 39.
Cuthbert John Lanyon, age 20.
Thomas Mackenzie Chalmers, age 32.
Robert Sanderson, age 31.
Also, on the evening of the 4th of August, we will turn a switch on in the cloister where the First World War Roll of Honour is. And for 4 years, visitors to the memorial who walk along that cloister will hear young voices reciting the name and the age of death of each one of the 62,000. We have already commenced this process. As you can see, we did a trial initially with 8 ACT schools. We are working with ABC Open. We're also working with Google. We are close to a web-based app. Our vision is that every Year 6 student in this country, whether in the Torres Strait or Arnhem Land, suburban Melbourne, outer metropolitan Perth, or Ballarat, the minister's hometown, will have an opportunity to record some names and age of death. They will come into our national collection. They will be here permanently. What this has already done in the schools where we have started is, having received a block of names and age of death, the teachers, often asked by the children themselves, have said, well, let's find something out about these young men. Who were they? And obviously, in a very practical way again, this connects our past, okay, with our present, but more importantly with our future, to look beyond again to the individuals that are behind those broad brushstrokes. I spent 3 years in Brussels as Australia's ambassador to NATO, European Union, Belgium and a few other things. of all of the things I did, the most important and meaningful was the time I spent in these places. A man died 2.5 weeks ago, a man called Peter Pickering from Hobart, not a household name. He wrote me a letter and said, look, I've got a team of volunteers and we've been making little wooden crosses in our backyards, and then we go along to schools and we talk to senior primary school students about the Western Front and Australians who fought and then died there. And we make these crosses and the kids then write their messages on these crosses, and we'd like to get them onto Australian graves. He said, I've been to the DVA, no joy. I've been to the Tasmanian government for $500, no joy. He said, would you be our patron? So I said yes and sent him a donation as well. We have now ordered 100,000 crosses. And this is very powerful. We have 140,000 students come through the Australian War Memorial each year, and the numbers are growing. With the kids from senior primary school, at the end of their visit, we give them a cross and we say, please write your name and your school on one side and what this all means to you on the other. Last year we sent just 2,000 crosses to Paris and to Brussels for distribution by Australians on Anzac and Remembrance Day. All of us have been to a funeral, and you know what it's like at the end, the awkwardness of standing around outside the church, the mosque, the synagogue, or whatever it might be. Similarly, at the end of an Anzac Day service, whether it's dawn or any other, there's a little bit of that. I have seen Australians come up to the Stone of Remembrance and take a cross and walk through a cemetery looking for an Australian grave, choosing a grave, putting it on that headstone, very emotional, and taking a photograph of it and sending it back to the kids who wrote the message. We've ordered 100,000 crosses, which we will distribute with the support of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, not only to graves from the First World War, but from subsequent conflicts in every part of the world. As an example, these kids came from Hartwell Primary School in Campbellville, Victoria. And what you've got, if I was sitting in the back row, I could read it. The boy on the left has written on his cross, "Thank you for your sacrifice in war, and I am proud to say that I am a proud Aussie, thanks to you." The girl has written, "Your bravery and sacrifice will forever be in my heart. You have and will always be remembered by me for your courage." We are going to do this, and there are 8,000, as I understand it, Australians who will be very fortunate to go to Anzac Cove on Anzac Day next year. Surely it is not beyond the wit and will of our nation to provide each one of those Australians with one of these. We're open for business here in terms of helping to facilitate that. That will amplify the impact, not only for those that are visiting, but these young students who have a message of what it means to them. We're also going to run a conference, we're intending to, early next year, the Gallipoli 1915, a century on. You can read as well as I can, but we're expecting about 600 people to this, to examine in a scholarly but way which is accessible to a broader audience of Australians, the Gallipoli campaign. We also have found some extraordinary photographs which we're going to travel to communities and provide them digitally as well. Charles Ryan was a doctor, a surgeon. They turn up in all kinds of places. And Charles Ryan fought with the Turks 40 years before the Gallipoli landing. And then he was at Gallipoli. And briefly during the May Armistice, when the Australians and Turks respectively went out to retrieve their dead and wounded, because he had empathy and was respected by the Turks, he was standing in no man's land, engaged in conversation with the Turkish officers. But he was also a very keen photographer and had an eye for what was a very, very good image. We've got a stunning collection of photographs which we are producing that will be able to travel to and be available to communities right across Australia. We'll also be putting it into digital form, and we expect to be able to start this certainly this year. Large technology. We've actually decided that we will travel the 9.2 howitzer, which for those of you who are not military is this thing. Here we have a Hunslet, which is a train that was used to drag our troops' equipment across the Somme, amongst other things. We're going to bring that and several other items into Anzac Hall. We're going to very carefully relocate onto our grounds, covered and properly curated, the Sydney Emden story, and there are some other naval stories that we want to also get into our exhibition. Mad photographers, many of you would be familiar with Wilkins and Hurley. Frank Hurley and Wilkins, they basically turned up in Flanders in 1917. It was the wettest winter in half a century. The Australians lived underground for 3 months, and then Australia had 48,000 casualties in 4 months at the Third Battle of Ypres. That, of course, being one of the 3 major battles of the Western Front alongside the Somme and Verdun. Hurley's photography in particular, as you know, is moving, it's graphic, it's poignant. At the age of 31, he said of the photographs he was taking, there is a dead body every 20 paces, all severely mutilated, and I won't in any more graphic detail repeat exactly what he said. Similarly, we're creating this exhibition. It will travel, it will be available to communities, like multiple sets of them, and also available in digital form. The Meningate Lines. Ypres was destroyed in the First World War. It was, of course, at the epicentre of the Ypres salient battle, the Third Battle of Ypres, Passchendaele, and so on. The Meningate Lines were placed on the Menin Road over the medieval wall around the city of Ypres in 1856. Every Australian who fought and died on the Ypres salient marched down the Menin Road between the lines. And in 1935, to thank us for what we had done, the people of Ypres donated them to Australia. And you may not have noticed them, but when you walk into the Australian War Memorial, you see these 2 magnificent stone lions either side. Here's a wartime image of one of the lions still intact. The Germans had pinpointed, obviously, this site because it was the narrow point at which the troops would be marching off to the front. There, of course, is the Menin Gate, as it is today. 55,000 names etched into it, including 6,169 Australian names. And here's a photograph of the lions being packed onto the train in Ypres to go to Antwerp and subsequently be shipped to Australia. Early in 2017, thanks to Qantas, we are going to send the lions back to Ypres. They are going to be placed on plinths, curated just on the Menin Road here, on this very wide footpath, which I happen to know very well. And this is the entrance to the Menin Gate, down the Menin Road, into the town of Ypres. That will be one of the significant things that we will be doing to commemorate the centenary of the First World War in Flanders in 2017. Every single night, the last post is played here at the Menin Gate to honour all of these Commonwealth soldiers who gave their lives and whose bodies were never found. That, of course, is the Lions. There are some very professional and technical people that have said to me, well, Brendan, you know, I'm a bit worried about sending the Lions back and, you know, they might get damaged and so on. A lot of restoration work was done to them. One in particular was damaged significantly during the war. My own view is you only get a centenary every 100 years. There is no point having them unless people can see them. They've been out in the weather for a while, like over a century. They've also seen some tough times. So there is risk in this. There's risk, of course, that a vehicle will come off the road. There's risk of vandalism. There's risk of environmental damage. There's all of that. But it is well and truly worth the effort to do this. And it is the direct link between us, the people of Ypres, and the commemoration of ultimately 18,000 Australians who lost their lives in Flanders. So that will be happening early in 2017. They will be there for a year and then they will return. There will be bollards placed up around them, of course, protective casing, proper curating and all of those things. We're also loaning the Davana boat to the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne. We have an Ascot landing boat, which you saw depicted as at the entrance to the new galleries. This is the Davana, the other boat that we have. It's in perfect, pristine, restored condition. It's going down to the shrine and will proudly be there for the duration of the centenary. We're also, we have 36,000 artworks here at the memorial from some of the finest artists this country's ever produced, from Dyson to Quilty. Again, our view is and must be there is no point having it if people can't see it. Beyond what we will be exhibiting in our First World War galleries and in the memorial itself, we're getting it out. Obviously, it costs money to get it out. People have to curate it, it has to be freighted and all of those things. But already I have written to members of Parliament and senators here in the national capital. I've written to premiers and territory chief ministers saying, would you like to exhibit a piece of our artwork for the centenary? The Albany Interpretive Centre, the first two convoys have left from Albany, and the commemoration of that will be a significant event, of course, later this year. We are working in terms of curating and providing technical assistance and objects for the Interpretive Centre at Albany. The National Maritime Museum is conducting a major touring exhibition for the centenary. Again, we are providing assistance, artworks and items from our collection to it. Peter Burness, a national living treasure in my view, is our preeminent expert on the First World War and has written, I've had the privilege to write the foreword for it, written a book for what I regard as the average Australian. A book which is very eloquent, easy to read, explanations of the First World War, based a lot on personal stories with some magnificent images. The Gallipoli collections, Peter Pedersen, already the author of 7 books on this, again is writing, has written a book which again really accessible to everyday people with images and photographs of items from our collection which tell the Gallipoli story. We shortly will, I'll show you what our logo is for the centenary of the First World War. The official merchandising for the centenary of the First World War has been conducted and developed by the Department of Veterans Affairs in cooperation with us. The memorial, as it always has and always will, is also producing its own merchandising for the centenary of the First World War, hasten to add dignified and appropriate. And we're also working, as you can see, closely with the Royal Australian Mint in the production of commemorative coins. The Indigenous story is one that has not been adequately told, and it will be. We will, in our First World War galleries and everything else we're doing, draw out the Indigenous story where it is there. You may remember the image of Blackburn from Anzac Voices, for example. We are not under any circumstances going to tell a separate Indigenous story. Indigenous Australians have had enough separation and suffered enough from it over the years, but where there is an Indigenous participation in the story throughout the First World War, we will be drawing it out and ensuring Australians are aware of it, know it, and more importantly, understand it. We're also working with DVA, the Australian Defence Force, and ANU on the Fighting for Our Country project, and we're also providing support to now at least 15 documentaries that are being made telling the story of Indigenous service for our nation in the First World War. We're also commissioning a significant lone pine sculpture from the timber that we do have from the lone pine tree, which I described earlier on. We're also going to produce a very special series of prints. We're commissioning 5 Australian and New Zealand artists respectively to do artworks which focus specifically on commemoration of the First World War. This is not something that necessarily you would notice, but we'll point it out to you. Currently, the lighting of the memorial is this, very familiar to all of you, I would think. We are well advanced now in redesigning the lighting from the memorial. I know some of you perhaps are sitting there and thinking, in this environment, I can't believe they're investing in this. You cannot underestimate the importance of this. You'll notice that in what we are going to do, that the Hall of Memory and those 5 stained glass windows at this end with their 5 values of resource, candour, curiosity, independence are going to be, and devotion are going to be displayed. It's important that the lighting of the memorial, which in itself is a story and an iconic piece of heritage architecture, is appropriate in terms of what we're trying to do. I tell all of the visitors who come to the memorial, I point them down Anzac Parade across the lake to the Parliament, and I say the political capital of our nation is represented there, but the soul of the nation is here, and it needs to be appropriately and sensitively lit. There are other things, of course, that we will be doing, which at this stage are not planned. It's obvious that we will be doing something to mark in a dignified way the commencement of the centenary of the First World War and the occasions that will occur through the duration of it. The last post ceremony, for example, we already have families that have booked a story to be told in 2015, 16 and beyond, where they're planning to come to Canberra and to commemorate a particular family member that is important to them. So are there any questions? Okay, well that's good. I did give my wife a Dorothy Dixer, but she's obviously forgotten it. Well, look, if there aren't any questions, Modge, what's our weather like? Okay, good. I mentioned earlier that we have designed our logo for the centenary of the First World War. And the logo, shortly we will all leave this theatre and you will be given a folder. The folder will include in more detail each information in relation to each of the initiatives which I've outlined. And it will also include a commemorative cross to give you, so you can see a cross that these students are writing their messages on. And it will also include our centenary logo. We have licensed the logo. I've already agreed for it to be used for good purposes, charitable purposes in support of veterans, but for our partners, those companies and individuals that partner with us, we'll be licensing them to use that in ways that we approve over the 4 years of the centenary. The support that we are given, whether it's BHP Billiton, whether it's the Lamberts, whether it's Qantas or Boeing or anybody else, the support that we are given enables us to take something from outstanding to stunning. And we are all living in challenging economic times, and so that is part of what we are doing. So when we go out the front, also as the logo is presented to you, it'll be projected onto the front of the Australian War Memorial. John Schumann, for whom I have immense respect, although not necessarily share the same political view of the world, John Schumann and the Vagabonds will perform some just appropriate music for the occasion. I should have also mentioned, which reminds me, when you saw Anzac Day 2015, it said Anzac Day and commemorative performance. Anzac Day next year will fall on a Saturday, and it will be a long weekend. On the Sunday evening, after the last post, in the early evening, we will put on a commemorative performance here. I've asked John Schumann to coordinate that. Already a number of the nation's best known and respected artists have agreed to come. The music will be the genre of the First World War, then through to including conflicts to today. So you would expect that John Schumann will perform I Was Only 19, for example. But there will be a range of songs that will be performed which are appropriate to the venue and also the occasion. This will be a commemoration, not a celebration. And interspersing those musical performances will be readings from letters and diaries and some First World War poetry. I can assure you that we, again, will do Australia proud with this. The backdrop will, of course, be the Australian War Memorial and projections onto it from our very rich and deep archive. So please, Modge, if I seem, Modja, it's not bucketing down. We haven't got a Angus Houston symphony drama or... right, okay. So please come along. I know many of you will be wanting to get home. This will take about 15 minutes and then you're right. Thank you very, very much. John Schumann and the Vagabonds have very generously come along here this evening and will shortly perform some music which is appropriate to where we are and that which we are honouring and commemorating. And as I also said and reminded you inside, the vision for the Australian War Memorial was that of Charles Bean. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved. Here we guard the record which they themselves made. In a moment you will see our logo for the centenary, which draws on his vision, but importantly connects this institution, the sacrifices of the 2 million men and women who stand behind it and within it, particularly those 330,000 from the First World War, to link Bean's vision to us and who we are.
The old man burned his letters, and the first and the last he burned, and he scratched his name from the Bible, and the old girl's back was turned. A year went past and another, and the fruit came down the line. They had heard the boy had enlisted, but the old man made no sign. His name must never be mentioned on the farm by Gundagai. They were squatters at Riverina, with ever the church hard by. And the boy came home on his final, and the townsfolk bonfire burned, and his mother's arms were around him, but the old man's back was turned.